So what would it take to motivate oneself? I think that procrastination is one of the greatest challenges that we suffer from in a culture of plenty, living in these great United States of America in what is perhaps the most prosperous period in all of human history, perhaps. What would it take to motivate us? Welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. We encounter the answer to this question in the most beautiful way in the Torah portion this week, which talks about the miracle of the construction of the tabernacle. You see, the tabernacle was this portable shul that was built in the desert when the Jewish people traveled from their Egyptian slavery into the promised land. It took them 40 years. They took the long route. They weren't using the GPS. Men, they don't ask for directions. But imagine they did ask for directions. If they listened to what God had to tell them, they'd be there quicker. But no, they had to do it their way. That's a different story for another parsha. But here we go. We're on the way to the promised land, and we're building this tabernacle. It's a portable shul. It's like, 60 by, I don't know, maybe 100. 60 by 100 maybe. And it's a portable thing. You got to build it every time they camped. They got to take it down every time they moved. For 40 years, they schlepped this thing around. And in the portion this week, we learned about the completion of the tabernacle and how the various presidents of each of the 12 tribes of Israel, the 13 tribes of Israel, actually inaugurated the tabernacle with their various gifts. And at the very end, the Torah tells us a very interesting statement. It's on page 858. If you have the Chumash in front of you, the blue Chumash, the Kahos Chumash, it says like this. In verse number 1, middle of page 858, 859, it says, the following took place on the first day of Nisan in the year 2449. How long ago was that? If we're in 5785, what's 5785 minus 2449? Let me know if you can figure it out. It's about 3,300 something years ago, which was the day in which Moses finished erecting the tabernacle. Now, that's a very interesting expression. The day in which Moses finished erecting the tabernacle. And in the Hebrew, it says, Vayihi b'yom kalais Moshe lehakim es hamishkan. And it was the day that Moses completed to finish the tabernacle. Now, our commentaries explain, why was it that Moses, why was he the one who built the tabernacle? Wasn't this all the Jewish people? Why does it say only Moses was the one that built the tabernacle? That's strange for the Torah to say that. The answer is because when they built the tabernacle, they realized that it was too heavy. They didn't do the load, the engineering components. The load analysis. There you go. They didn't do the load analysis. They're in front of the abacus and they couldn't figure out. They forgot to calculate. Oops, my bad. It's too heavy to lift up. I mean, you were dealing with pillars that were like 20 feet tall. I don't know how much they weighed, but they were too heavy to lift up. So the Jewish people said, oops, we built the beautiful parts of the tabernacle, but we don't know how to pick it up. So it was then that Moses says to God, what am I supposed to do? So God says to Moses, what? Oh, we're going to get there. So Moses says to God says to Moses, you do your part. You get in there and you start lifting it up and I will do the rest. And that's what happened. That Moses turned into Samson. He approaches the pillars and he starts lifting them up and imagine a guy in the gym, he's walking by in the gym and some guy is pumping, 400 pounds of weights. And some guy comes over and he's like, picks up with the left hand and he moves out of the way and he moves on. You'd be like, what? That's what Moses was, right? He picks up the tabernacle, picks up these very, very heavy pillars and he moves on his way. He's constructing it, which is all part of the miraculous nature of the survival of the Jewish people, really. And we spoke about this recently, that God blesses us on the edge of possibility. When we push ourselves to the edge of our capacity, of our potential, of our ability, that's when God blesses our actions. And the story occurs all the time when it comes to, the crossing of the Red Sea. The Jewish people were reluctant to enter the Red Sea, and it was Nachshon ben Aminadab, the head of the president of the tribe of Yehuda, who walks in on the command of Moses. He walks in, and when the water covers his nostrils, when he's reached the edge of his possibility, bam, that's when God does the rest. God splits the sea open. Same thing happens when it comes to the counting of the Levites. From the age of 30 days old, it was inappropriate for Moses to count the census of the Levites on 30 days old, to enter into the nursing suites of the mothers who were nursing the baby Levites. So what he would do is he would go to the entrance of every tent, and as he stood at the entrance of every tent, that's when a heavenly voice called out and declared the numbers of the Levites in that particular tent. If God already knew the answer, then why did Moses need to go to each tent? Answer is, God wanted Moses to do his part. You do as much as you can, and I will then take your blessing, bless you all the way through to the finish line. And this theme recurs over and over and over in Judaism.
If things are so heavy and so on, how did Bezalel manage to do everything?
Bezalel was the designer. He was the designer and the builder, but he didn't build it in erect. He built it sideways. Bezalel was the architect. Oh, but I want to give you further examples. Think about Mount Sinai. God gives us the Torah on Mount Sinai. So God descends from heaven, and Moses at 80 years old is forced to schlep up the mountain. Why do you have to make Moses schlep up the mountain? The poor guy is 80 years old. You have to make him go up a hike 2 miles up a mountain? Moses needed to schlep as much as a human being can go, and that's where God meets us. King David tells us the same thing in the book of Tehillim, in Psalms of David. He says, God, your God will bless you. But when will God bless you? And everything that you do. When you invest the effort, that's when God will bless you with success. But if you just sit back and say, you know what, God, it's your problem. You're going to provide for my needs. That's when God says, you're out, I'm out, right? So Moses, therefore, experienced this extraordinary miracle where he does his part, he approaches the pillars, and it's then that God does the rest, and he picks up the pillars. That's right. That's apparently what was going on over here.
Just the pillars.
Yeah. But not just that, there were also the tapestries. There were also the tapestries that covered over the tabernacle, which also were even more difficult. Think about it. Not only to lift up a heavy pillar, but this time a tapestry which probably weighs more than a pillar, and to drape it all over the whole thing, it's like impossible. But the question that Andy asked, Andy must be an engineer. Because Andy says, what's the problem? Andy asked the question. They've already lifted heavy things before. This ain't their first rodeo. You see, the Jewish people were already, this generation was slaves in Egypt. They already built the pyramids. There are hieroglyphics on the pyramids showing slaves building the pyramids. They had those elaborate pulley systems where, you had like they're using, I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but they have oxen pulling one way, and there's a pulley system and the slaves and the rollers. They figured this thing out before. Why couldn't they use a pulley system? I mean, granted, they couldn't use a crane. Maybe they weren't invented yet, but there were other mechanisms. How do you think they got the stones up on top of the pyramids? They had done this before. So what then was the reason that the Jewish people suddenly became inept, that they were no longer able to build the tabernacle, which was not as tall as the Sphinx? So why then I've never seen the Sphinx in person, but I don't know how tall it is. I'm sorry. Maybe it is. I don't know. Sphinx is pretty tall. All right. So why then could the Jews not succeed in building the tabernacle themselves? Why do they need Moses and Moses' miracle? In a talk that the Rebbe delivered in 1985, the Rebbe explained that there's a fundamental difference between the way they built the tabernacle and the way that they built the pyramids. What was the one difference between these two operations? One word: duress. Duress. In the case of the pyramids, they were under duress. They were slaves with a gun to their head, with a whip to their back. Pharaoh's taskmasters were prodding them along, and if they failed to comply, they'd be whipped or killed. When it came to the construction of the tabernacle, they had options. Nobody was putting a gun to their head. This was a construction. What? It was voluntary. This was a construction that was done with joy. Remember, the fundraising to the temple was done kol nadiv lev, which means every generous of heart. People donated according to the generosity of their hearts. There wasn't some sort of a mandatory assessment. There was now demanding a tax from every Jew of different ages of tax brackets. This was a voluntary construction project. This was something which was a gift of the heart, not a product of the whip. And once that came to play, an amazing human nature comes to the fore. We as human beings tend to underperform when we have other options, and we tend to succeed when we have no other option. When we're struggling with procrastination, if we were to remind ourselves somehow that there is no other option, this needs to be done. And in fact, to those parts of our lives that absolutely need to happen. If you don't pay this bill, you can lose your house. You can lose your job. You can lose your car. You might get it. You might get your car repossessed. Right? It's when we experience situations which are do or die moments. Those are the ones where we tend to deliver. It's only when we have other options that we tend to complain and kvetch and say that's too difficult. Give another beautiful example. When it comes to war, when it comes to the mitzvah of going to battle, it's a mitzvah in Torah to go out to battle, to fight the wars of the Jewish people. The Torah tells us that there is an exception to going out to battle, and that is the coward. The man who is fearful and soft of heart has an exemption from going out to battle. Why is that? Maimonides tells us that if a man is cowardly, if a man is weak of heart, soft of heart, if he's fearful, goes out to battle, then what's going to happen to the rest of the soldiers? He's going to spread fear and weakness amongst the other soldiers. We can't afford that. So there was actually a whole process before going out to battle where the high priest or the priest in charge of the war would declare that anybody who had an exemption should please depart right now. They tried not to embarrass this guy because there were 3 other exemptions: a person who got married within the year, a person who built a house and didn't move in, and a person who planted a vineyard that hadn't been consumed yet, hadn't been tasted. These 4 people had the exemption and were therefore able to go home from war. So nobody really knew why those guys were leaving. Was it because of fear? Maybe he planted a vineyard. Maybe he just built a house. Maybe he just got married. What's fascinating about, and by the way, if once you did eventually start the battle, the strongest soldiers of Israel were not in the front lines; they were in the back lines of the army. They had clubs of iron in their hands to break the knees of any one of the Jewish soldiers who was retreating from battle. To break the legs.
Stalin was not the first.
No. So it was to break the legs of any Jewish soldiers who were retreating, because the beginning of defeat is retreat. The beginning of defeat is retreat, and the beginning of retreat is fear. Right? When we fight without fear, that's when God blesses our actions, aligned with what I said earlier. So you had to go out to battle, you had to face one way, there was no turning back once you went into battle. But what's interesting is that Maimonides tells us that when does this cowardly exemption apply? Only when it's a war which is optional. Milchemes Reshus, it's called. When the king of Israel wants to expand the territory, when it's an optional war, that's when the exemption of cowardliness applies. But if it's a war of self-defense, if it's a war like October 7th, where we are being attacked and our very existence is under threat, now there is no option of exemption. Even the coward has to go out to battle. And you ask yourself, why would that be? How does that make any sense? If God is allowing us to exempt the cowardly warrior, the fearful warrior, because he's going to spread fear, then why are we not afraid of exactly the same problem happening when it's a war which is mandatory, a war of self-defense? The answer is clear. When it's a war which is optional, that's when fear is an option. But when it's a war which is not optional, fear is no longer the option. You don't actually experience fear. In other words, you don't have the luxury. You don't have the luxury to be able to say, well, actually, I'm not in the mood. Nobody asked you, because guess what's going to happen?
It's an existential threat.
It's an existential threat. And if you don't do this, then there's going to be nothing to worry about at all, because you and your family, God forbid. John Wayne famously said that the courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid as something and doing it anyways and saddling up anyways. That's a courage. What?
True Grit. That was the movie.
Okay, fair enough. All right, I can't say that I watched it, but I heard the quote. So courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is having fear and saddling up anyways. That's how these soldiers would go out to battle in a war which is mandatory. They'd go out not because they were no longer afraid. Maybe they were afraid, but they knew this was existential, and therefore there was no option. They went out and they won the war. How do I know they won the war? Because we're still here today.
Well, actually, when you are very much under dangerous situation, you don't experience fear.
Oh, coming from a doctor. Hey, are you
coming from another doctor? I was once in my clinic. It was very bad area, and the police called us, and they say, Dr. Berman, there is a man that we pursue who has a gun who just ran into your clinic.
So a guy with a fugitive from the police ran into his clinic with a gun, and then what happened?
In Opaloka, Florida.
So what happened then? So a guy runs into your clinic with a gun.
They told me, try to evacuate the patients before we come in.
Okay.
I hung up. I was completely calm, absolutely. And I come to the room to one patient. I say, listen, you know what? We need to look at the test result. Why don't you go and rest? Go have a hamburger or whatever. Come back like in an hour because we're waiting for a test.
Okay.
Went to the other room, and then I came to my front desk. I said, listen, you know what?
So you were very calm throughout the process.
Absolutely.
Where was the guy in the meantime? Was he in the waiting room?
In the waiting room. Sitting.
He was sitting in the waiting room, and you are calmly dismissing the patients.
I dismissed the patients, and then I said to my to my staff, I say, I have three ladies. Yoko was there, and the other two ladies, and I say, three. And I say, ladies, I need to see you in the laboratory.
Emergency.
No, there's no, I need to see you in the back. I want to have a conference with you because we have certain things we need to discuss. Please go to my office. My office was in the
Right.
back. So they went in the back.
And then you called the
I
place to come
went
in.
to my office and I told them, okay, now you lie down.
Right.
Just lie down. Don't ask any.
Good story. Good story. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to give another example of that. Another example of that is like this. You know, you're not allowed to smoke on Shabbos. You're not allowed to smoke on Shabbos because you're not allowed to light a fire. It's a very interesting thing with the religious people. Religious people that do smoke, some of them do smoke, they can't control themselves. All week long, they can't control themselves. Comes Shabbos, 25 hours, they're not smoking. But the minute that Shabbos is out, they can't control themselves. They need to take a cigarette. Why is that? Because on Shabbos, they know they have no other option, and therefore the addiction flies out the window. But during the rest of the 6 days of the week, they know that I'm not a smoker, I'm just that, the other, right? Same thing with people that are trying to lose weight, right? People that are trying to lose weight and they want to avoid the cheese Danish, but cheese Danish is looking so good. Well, what are you going to do about it? You got to eat it. But then you know what you can do to them to make them stop eating it? Give them a little bite of a hot dog. Give them a little biltong or something, some meat, and what's going to happen? The minute that they eat the meat, they know that for the next 6 hours, they're not allowed to eat the dairy, and therefore the temptation goes out the window. And this, my friends, is what the Torah is teaching us this week about overcoming procrastination. If we want to do something, we want to overcome procrastination, then figure out a way to realize how this is existential. If you can figure out a way how it's existential, you'll be able to overcome the problem. But as long as it's just optional, like the Jewish people in the desert, all bets are off the table as to whether or not you're actually going to be able to do it.
I was doing it for 70 years.
So I just want to conclude by saying this. That when it comes to the war that we're in right now, it's October 7th war. Something very, very interesting has happened to the global Jewish community. For many years, the Jewish people felt that we were now finally accepted by the nations of the world.
Really?
We did. Before October 7th. We had a seat at the United Nations. Yeah, they were a little bit biased.
A little bit.
At the United Nations, but for the most part, we were treated as an equal. You know, we were having partnerships with other countries. We were respected. Our right to exist was recognized by most nations of the world. Comes October 7th, and suddenly the spaghetti hit the fan. Suddenly now, the United Nations has a meeting yesterday where all of the members of the United Nations Security Council, all except the United States, rule that we must establish a Palestinian state immediately. And I think the ruling was that the war in Gaza has to stop. The war in Gaza has to stop immediately. And they have the United Nations, with their incredibly impressive track record of having nothing to do with terrorism, right? They say they want to self-appoint themselves, the Hamas affiliated United Nations. They want to appoint themselves to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza because they know how to provide humanitarian aid, right? There's video of United Nations employees kidnapping Israeli corpses into Gaza. There's video of this, right?
Not real.
So only the United States says yesterday, only the United States said that this is a joke. It can't even be taken seriously because here you are condemning Israel, but not condemning Hamas. Here you are with not a single mention of the hostages. Just this morning, they discovered Israel retrieved two hostage bodies, two dead hostages in a hospital. Hostages being held in a hospital inside of Gaza. I think it's called the European Hospital, right? Clearly violating all international law, turning the hospital into a terrorist beehive, a hornet's nest of activity. But you won't hear the condemnation from the United Nations. So there wasn't a single mention of hostages, only that Israel is the aggressor and Israel is to cease and desist. Our own boys and girls are stuck languishing in the dungeons of Gaza, but the nations of the world are condemning us as the aggressor. We, the victim, is the aggressor. What we've come to learn from October 7th is that we are in fact alone in this world. Behold, the nation set apart, not recognized by the nations. We come to realize that instead of leaning on the nations for our support, we have no other choice but to lean on God. Until October 7th, our commitment to Hashem was optional, perhaps. Yeah, you know what? Torah is one form of way of life. And maybe you want to choose that form of life if you have no other interests. Or maybe not. But after October 7th, we realized there's nobody else to stand for us. What are you going to do? You're going to wait for Macron to save us in time of need? You're going to wait for who? Who are you going to wait for to save us in the time of need? Even the United States of America is motivated by the interests of the United States of America. And I don't care who you voted for. The president of the United States of America is interested in the polls of Americans. And their interests are America's interests, not Israel's interest. And in case you were wondering, they made it very clear when they say make America great again. They never said make Israel great again, right? Even the current president, that's his position. He's very, very clear about it. So just in case you think that things are going to be amazing because your candidate is in office, that means absolutely nothing. Today, our survival depends on our connection to the Almighty God, Master of heaven and earth. He is the only one that can save us from this awful predicament where the war is being fought not only from 7 fronts around Israel, but from within Israel itself, where you have political factions that threaten to rip the country apart as they were before the war, where you have presidents, governments, leaders of supposedly civilized Western institutions and governments that are blatantly, shamelessly supporting the death cult, which is Hamas. College campuses, these are the leaders of tomorrow. The U.S. college campuses are supporting this shamelessly. The police, you hear about these riots in Toronto and Canada that are attacking pro-Israel supporters, and the police are not necessarily there. The police in Amsterdam were not there. The police in Toronto, they weren't necessarily there. And this is the world that we live in. Today, we're living in an existential time of the survival of our nation. No longer is it optional for us to observe Torah mitzvahs. From this point on, from October 7th, we are in a do or die moment. Our tefillin today is what's going to determine whether or not the divine intervention of God will happen before or after, God forbid. I don't even want to say what could possibly happen. our tefillin, our Shabbos candles, our Torah study, our commitment to God Almighty, our commitment to the Torah, our courage to be able to stand before the nations of the world and say, we are not occupiers because this is our biblical homeland. That's why it's called the Promised Land. And we are the chosen people. Now we have no other choice but to stand up to the world and say, this is our home because God gave it to us. Act like God gave it to you. Because if you're walking around without a yarmulke on your head and without tzitzis and violating the Shabbos and violating the commandments of the Torah, and you claim, oh yeah, God gave us the land, the nations look at you like you're a total idiot. But if you're able to stand proud and tall with the yarmulke and tzitzis, with Shabbos observance, and with kosher, and with all the other mitzvahs and the Jewish values, not just, the Tikkun Olam values, which is a bastardization of our faith, degrading a commitment to one God into some sort of a humanitarian organization for people of special needs. We don't need to reduce Judaism into some sort of a non-for-profit corporation, when in fact, it is the greatest gift that this world has ever seen. We are called upon to be a light unto the nations. And when we do act that way, when we light up the nations, inspiring our fellow Jews to connect to our God and inspiring our fellow Gentiles to connect, like Dean is saying, to the 7 Noahide laws, to be able to find each and every human being's connection to God Almighty. It's then that when we behave as a light unto the nations, as God's chosen people, without any other choice, without any other option, we're motivated to realize that our survival depends on our actions. We're not spectators in this theater of war. We are on the field, and most of us are sleeping. We have no other choice but to wake up and to smell the coffee. Thank you very much. Yes?
As far as I understand, what can we do? I mean, maybe we should, hire...
PR firm?
No. Hold on, it's not a joke. Maybe we can get some kind of a Jewish guy who is, let's say, will do some course on firearms in the synagogue.
Firearms. You want to have a firearms course in the synagogue? First of all, we've done that before, and we have that, number one. But second of all, that's not my point. Yes, of course we have to arm ourselves. It's obvious you have to arm yourself. You have to be able to protect yourself. But what we need to do is beyond the firearms, we need to secure divine intervention. Only God can save us from the global jihad that we're facing right now, from the global blood libel that is being attacked, that is attacking every single Jew wherever we are today. There is a blood libel. It used to be that only the ignorant masses, the mobs of Christians that would march out of the churches on a Sunday morning, being incited by the priests to go and attack the Jews who were Jesus killers or something like that, or drinking the blood of Christian children, which is utterly ignorant and entirely false. Today, that's exactly what's happening. The nations of the world, the young people in the world, the college students are going out there marching, and they're calling us baby killers. They're calling us genocidal occupiers and colonizers, when in fact, there's only one country in the world that speaks Hebrew, and there's countless countries that speak Spanish, countless countries that speak English, countless countries that speak French, because they indeed are the colonizers. If we're colonizers, we're doing a very, very bad job. And the only place in the world that speaks Hebrew is the one country that happens to be called Israel, that happens to be called the Promised Land. The nations won't believe it if we don't believe it. When we behave like it's the land of Israel, when a Jew stands up in front of the United Nations and talks about the occupied Golan Heights or the West Bank, he's essentially saying, we are occupiers and you're an idiot. You're an idiot for saying that we are occupiers. It's like me coming up and saying, my house, which is really owned by someone else that I'm stealing the house from. Why would you speak like that? Why are you so insanely insecure that you cannot assert your own right to exist? So instead of using terminology that incriminates ourselves, it's time that we speak about Judea and Samaria instead of the West Bank. It's time that we use terms like Israel instead of Palestine. It's time that we use terms like God's chosen people instead of the Israelis, to talk about the land that was promised, the promised land, instead of the modern state of Israel. It's time that we speak about not human rights, but the values of Torah. It's time that we speak not about United Nations resolutions, but about the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah and the 7 Noahide laws. Because when we focus our attention on what God wants from us, it's then that God delivers what we want from him. And we then are able to experience the success, the victory,